In this chapter, we're going to cover the following main topics: Zero Trust for Identity and Access Management, designing a strategy for access to cloud resources, recommending an identity store, i.e., tenants, B2B, or B2C, recommending an authentication and authorization strategy, designing a strategy for conditional access, designing a strategy for role assignment and delegation, designing a security strategy for the privileged role access, designing a security strategy for privileged activities, case study, designing a zero trust architecture. Zero trust for identity and access management. In the previous chapter, you learned about the design for an identity security strategy and how to evaluate the strategy for security operations. Managing and monitoring potential threats and vulnerabilities with security operations is aided by a zero trust strategy. This is increasingly true when determining a strategy for recommendations to design a secure identity and access architecture. Let's review some of the foundational elements of zero trust and how they relate to securing identities. Zero trust is an integrated approach to securing access with adaptive controls and continuous verification across your entire digital estate. Everything from the user's identity to the application's hosting environment verifies the request and prevents a breach. To limit the impact of potential breaches, we apply segmentation policies, employ the principle of least privilege access, and use analytics to help detect and respond quickly. Zero Trust is a security strategy. It is not a product or a service, but an approach to designing, adopting, and implementing defined, verified security principles. Simplified, Zero Trust can be boiled down to three basic tenets, as defined by Microsoft. Verify explicitly. In other words, authentication and authorization should be re-verified when a user or device is determined to have changed location, when a device has changed compliance or health, or if there is a behavioral anomaly detected. These should all be triggers for further identity verification. Next, use least privileged access. Limiting user access with just-in-time access and only the level of access or assigned role that is required to perform their defined tasks to protect both data and productivity. Finally, assume breach. Minimize the blast radius for breaches and employ security strategies to prevent lateral movement. Microsoft Zero Trust is currently defined by 6 pillars of coverage to which each of these principles can apply. The first, identity. Identity is the first pillar of Zero Trust, much like a cloud defense in-depth strategy. Access should only be granted to people, devices, and resources that are authorized and required to complete a task. Endpoints. Assessing the security compliance of device endpoints is the next area to which Zero Trust applies, including Internet of Things or IoT devices. Third, applications. The entry point for access to an application should use Zero Trust oversight. Access to resources that are required for the application, such as databases or data sources, should also require additional verification. Next, network. Zero trust protections at the network layer for accessing resources are crucial, especially those within the corporate perimeter. This includes utilizing network and web application firewalls that provide deep packet inspection and application protection, respectively, to verify the integrity of the information that is coming into the network. The next is infrastructure. Applying zero trust principles to the infrastructure hosting your data on premises and in the cloud is a step just beyond the network pillar. This can be done with the overall hardening of operating systems, containers, or microservices that are part of the physical or virtual infrastructure to decrease the potential attack surface. Protecting access to ports through just-in-time access and bastion hosts can also decrease the likelihood of a security breach. Finally, data. Protecting the integrity of your data for customers, people, and the overall business can be done through utilizing key management systems such as Azure Key Vault, data loss prevention, and data governance with Purview, and vulnerability scanning and threat detection on database platforms. These six pillars create an end-to-end model for enforcing zero trust and decreasing the attack surface and the number of entry points for attackers or channels open to leak sensitive information. Optimizing identity and access management as the first line of defense in this strategy ensures that users are who they say they are at every access attempt and regularly reaffirms their trustworthiness. The next section will expand upon how the zero trust approach should be used to design a strategy for access to resources within cloud and hybrid environments in relation to identity and access. Designing a strategy for access to cloud resources. As we determine how access to cloud resources will be handled, let's think about the evolution of identity and access architectures. Identity and access prior to cloud technologies are typically handled from application to application. Developers of on-premises applications would have their user database accessed from within the application. Every application would have a database of users and passwords. Windows AD user databases could be tied into these applications and could also be integrated into some of these applications. However, full single sign-on capabilities were not widely available. As cloud technologies became available and software as a service or SaaS applications became more widely used by companies, the need to manage and govern identity and access expanded beyond the on-premises architecture. This expansion decreased the amount of control that IT departments had to protect identities and access behind network technologies such as firewalls, virtual local area networks, and virtual private area networks, or VLANs and VPNs, respectively. Modern authentication requires identity and access to be managed across on-premises networks. SaaS applications, Microsoft 365, Google Workspace, formerly called G Suite, and so on, and cloud providers such as Microsoft Azure, AWS, and GCP. These environments have data that includes personally identifiable information, or PII, business critical information, and intellectual property that needs to be protected. The identity and access architecture of these environments must take a zero trust approach to verify users and devices explicitly before authorizing access to resources. Figure 4.1 provides a diagram that shows the relationship between the various resources to access the access control and privileged access for the administration of resources. Pause the diagram here and pause the video here and study the diagram. Modern authentication has the following requirements for the access controls for resources and the parameters for privileged administrative access. Maintain a secure level of access to all resources by explicitly validating the trust of users and devices during access requests, using all available data and telemetry. Ensure that security assurances are applied consistently and seamlessly across the environments, including on-premises, SaaS, and cloud providers. The architecture should be comprehensive while enforcing an access policy as close to the resources and access entry points as possible. Controls that are in place should be identity-centric. They should prioritize the use of identity and related controls when available, since the physical infrastructure is no longer a responsibility when working in cloud environments. Coordinating the various environments to access adds additional complexity to the enforcement of zero trust. Traditional on-premises identity and access directories do not have single sign-on, or SSO. Integration with cloud providers and applications. In addition, these on-premises networks do not have visibility of identity threats within these expanded environments. The architect of the identity and access requires a holistic review of the integration points in the hybrid environment. Figure 4.2 shows the expanded view of the enterprise. Pause the video here and study the diagram. The various means of user and app access need to be considered when determining the verification points for a zero trust framework. Taking the steps to protect these access points with zero trust will be determined as follows. Integration and federation are created between cloud identities and on-premises identity databases for a single management plane. To be able to enforce zero trust across the enterprise, you need to have a strong modern authentication architecture. Azure Active Directory, or Azure AD, provides a method of enabling strong authentication along with a point of integration for endpoint security to multiple types of devices. Azure AD can also be the primary point of enforcing policies to verify and guarantee least privileged access across the hybrid environment. Azure AD provides CA, or conditional access, to enforce policy-based decision points for access to cloud and on-premises applications based on user identity, the access environment, device health, and potential risk. These policies provide explicit verification of identity at the point and time of access. Conditional access policies provide a gate to verify access and identify areas for the remediation of potential vulnerabilities and risks. Planning and creating a strategy for CA, or conditional access, will be discussed in the Designing a Strategy for CA section of this chapter. The visibility of user and device activity through analytics can provide an operational insights into the entire identity and access infrastructure. Logging with Azure AD provides reporting on authentication, authorization, and provisioning activities across users and devices. These logs can be used in Azure AD for monitoring and reporting, as well as integrated into SIEM or SIEM solutions, such as Microsoft Sentinel, for advanced hunting of potential identity attacks on the MITRE framework. Identity protection and identity governance monitor and manage the access privileges of identities. Identity protection determines the potential risks to users and sign-ins. Identity governance reviews the roles of users and manages their continued access through access reviews. Microsoft's machine learning capabilities can analyze various threat signals from security solutions to improve the overall detection, protection, and response to user and device identity and access. Identity and access architectures that span across on-premises and cloud providers can be integrated into Azure AD for a complete view and more effective management and governance. This can be accomplished with Microsoft Defender for Identity, or MDI, and Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps. MDI provides data on risky behavior for users that are accessing on-premises resources and applications through either traditional or modern authentication methods. Microsoft Defender for Cloud Apps provides and discovers third-party cloud applications that are being accessed on the company network. This discovery allows you to verify and approve access to compliant applications. Utilizing Azure AD for identity and access provides a cloud-based identity and access management service for all Microsoft cloud solutions and an integration point for on-premises and cloud-based identity providers. Azure AD can provide SSO authentication, conditional access, verification with MFA, and passwordless authentication. This adds new capabilities of provisioning users through automation and provides additional enterprise-enabled features for protecting and automating identity protection and governance. The next section will discuss recommendations for an identity store and how Azure AD can be used as an integration point for multiple identity providers for cloud and on-premises applications.